Hello, welcome to episode 3 of the Bot Brothers, AI for Educators. I'm Mike Pearson.
And I'm Pat Burns.
Today's show is going to explore prompt engineering. We will discuss what it is and why it is important. But before that, Pat and I were talking and we realized that we never bothered to introduce ourselves. So we're going to do that in the introduction of our show.
Great. So, Mike, who the heck are you?
Well, Pat, as you know, I teach high school English in the Chicago area. I've got a BA and a MA in English, language and literature, and I've got my master's in educational leadership. So I could go be a building principal if I wanted to, but I'm not on that track. A former musician and current musician. You might check out the old Chicago band, the Blue Meanies. That was my band, and then recent band, the Great Influence Machine. And currently, my life is filled up with being a father to 5-year-old identical twin girls.
Great, awesome. Thanks for sharing that. So I'm Pat Burns. This is actually, I think, depending on how I scale it or judge, I've been teaching for in around like 13, 14 years. But I had some experiences overseas. After college, I went overseas. I was in the U.S. Peace Corps for just over 2 years, 25 months in Central Asia, and taught there. Although it's a very different experience than teaching in the U.S. for a whole host of reasons. Actually, after I left that, I jumped in a bunch of other fields like finance, online ticket sales, theater work, etc. And then I made my way back to education. I always figured I'd be an educator, and I've been doing it since. And like Mike, I'm teaching out in the Chicagoland area. I love it. It's been great. High school level, of course, primarily juniors and seniors in our English department. I have 2 masters, so one in liberal studies and one also in a principal prep program. But I have yet to take my license test, so I have to do that.
That's true.
Yeah, so I've got to sort that out. Yeah, I hope so. But we'll see whether or not I do admin or not. Time will tell. But for right now, I'm pretty content with the classroom. So.
I think an interesting thing about us knowing each other is that years ago, Pat was talking about doing a bicycle trip across the United States of America, and I wasn't too busy. I wasn't married yet. And I said I would join him. And then we had time constraints. So we ended up taking our bicycles from Portland, Oregon, all the way down to San Francisco-ish. We took a bus there.
We cheated a little bit.
Did some guerrilla camping, but that was probably, in my opinion, what probably cemented our friendship from years ago. It's probably the event.
Yeah, it was a great trip. Absolutely, some really, really wonderful stories that I don't know. I can't really see why we tell them here, but maybe one day.
Maybe one day it might come up.
That's a fantastic trip.
It was an adventure.
Yeah, and I'm a big traveler. This is something I've always loved to do, and doing with my family now is a lot of fun too. So, having said all that, we've been talking actually quite a bit over the past few weeks about how do you kind of utilize a lot of this AI in the classroom. And obviously ChatGPT, whether you're talking about 3 or 4, or you're thinking about maybe Bing, or now Bard's dropped, people are getting access to that you're trying to figure out how to use it is a really important one. And it requires a sense of kind of knowing how to kind of prompt it. And I know that you've had a lot of thoughts on this and some really good sort of ideas. So for those of you out who are interested in, how do you actually just kind of use the technology to your advantage and prompt it, usually use the term prompt engineering, to kind of facilitate or generate kind of the best responses for what it is you're trying to do. So Mike, can you maybe talk to us a little bit about what prompt engineering is, how it works, like what it's all about for our listeners?
Yeah, sure can. On Twitter, like just right now, I was looking at it today on our Bot Brothers AI Twitter account, and there's a ton of people talking about prompt engineering and how to prompt, and people doing examples. So I know people are in all kinds of different places. So we thought we'd kind of give a breakdown. So I think we're all familiar with Google and Bing and search boxes. And when you go to open up your ChatGPT account, if you haven't done so, you're going to see a box that looks very similar. Except in this box, it's called the prompt box, and you're not searching. You can search. You can treat it like a Google box and say, like, what is the capital of so and so, and it'll return something. But what you really do is that you kind of craft a prompt, and it takes some words. There's a piece called Prompt Engineering is Magic for English Majors, and the piece talks about how really it's the words that you choose that creates the output of what ChatGPT, I would assume Bard, who I haven't played with that yet, is going to create. So you have to kind of wordsmith And I think the most important thing is that if it's an old coder thing, an old HTML thing, if you put garbage in, garbage is going to come out of ChatGPT. So what you have to do, there's kind of the easiest parameter I can think of is like, and I don't want us to get in the habit of talking of AI like it's human, because it's not. And we'll probably have some discussions about that. Pat, you and I, we've been talking about that. We'll probably have some discussions on the show, but it's helpful to think of it as an assistant. And if it was an assistant, and say you're an English teacher and you wanted to create a task, or you want to complete a task, you have to kind of think of like, what instructions would you give a person in order to have them do the appropriate thing? So you can think of it like, and kind of break it down into context, task, instruction. And then the great thing about ChatGPT is that if you don't quite get the output you want, you can just, in the next prompt box, you can then alter I guess you can restate what you said, or you can modify it or refine it, and it will remember the entire thread, the entire chat, and it will change its output. So let me give you a real quick example. This is a super simple prompt. And this was about a thing that teachers do all the time, but this ChatGPT makes it easier. So the prompt is this: write a concise, approximately 75 words email to a student who is failing my English 2 class because the student is missing assignments. That was the prompt I gave it. And then it gave a pretty good letter. And then I followed that up with, keep the email the same, add 2 sentences about the importance of completing all work. Because the original output, the ChatGPT output, didn't quite do that. And I wanted it to say that there's some importance to doing this. So let me just quickly point out a couple of features. I'm telling it how long it should be. I'm telling it to be concise, and I give it a word limit, 75 words. And you need to think about like audience and purpose. An email, like that, what's the task? You're composing an email to who? To a student, and what is happening to that student who is failing my English 2 class. And if you get all that together, you're going to generate a pretty decent output.
Well, so let me ask you for a second. So kind of stop for a moment, because there's a lot of information. If you're writing a letter, though, it would seem to me that the tone's going to matter. Right. So how do you make sure that the tone matches what it is that you want to convey to anyone, whether it's a student or a parent, could be even a colleague or administrator, what have you? What are your thoughts on that? Like, how do you get the prompting, or how do you set the prompt so that it puts out or outputs not garbage, but something that's valuable?
Something good. Yeah. So there's a couple things, and there's actually a mini bot podcast that we did on our site that talks about is ChatGPT thinking, but it goes into large language models. So there's some more depth there, but really, Pat, what it comes down to is that just the fact that I said write an email to a student is giving it some context about what the tone's going to be. You can put adjectives. You can say like, write a sarcastic letter to a student, and it'll output something sarcastic, or write a formal or an academic or a collegial or whatever adjective. So you can supply adjectives to modify its output.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it does. Because I was just thinking about, when we're talking, we're shifting our tones all the time, right. But you said don't think of this as a human, because it's not. Right. And so taking that into account, how does it kind of convey very human-like sort of qualities, which is to say tone and emotion, that sort of thing? And you're saying it actually can kind of replicate it in a way, or mimic it through its language, but you have to tell it to do that. It won't just automatically do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a lot of information is just carried in the word choice.
Right.
Write a letter, write a poem, write a this, write a that.
Okay.
It's just because it's read so many. It's read.
Yeah.
It has analyzed and culled the data from so many places that that as soon as you say write a letter, to a president of a company, it's gonna kind of pull from those models.
Well, so then what sounds like what you're really saying is anytime you're prompting anything, I mean, there's certainly like maybe the context, or some sort of role you might want to give it, some kind of specifics, which is all helpful, but that. As prompters, we have to stop and actually be thoughtful and critically think through what is it that I'm actually trying to get here, right? It's one thing to say write a letter to a student, but why? For what purpose? Who's my audience, and how do I have to take that into account? In a funny way, it kind of makes me think of, we talk a lot about, whether you're talking about like a soapstone sort of skills in like an AP language class. Sure. That you always have to think about, things like purpose, occasion, audience, tone, et cetera, all these other kind of things. And and so it kind of sharpens your kind of thinking on what it is you're trying to do. But you have to kind of go through those steps if you want to get something that's of quality back.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, you're thinking of audience all the time. I think it's an even interesting thing. This is way ahead, but as students start using it in class, like what would you prompt it in order to create the appropriate tone for audience X?
Okay.
Because you always have to think about audience. Like, who is this going to go to? What do I want? What's the limitations on the output that I want?
Okay. Got it. Well, that's great. I appreciate you explaining that.
So I think that about covers, but at least like the prompt box and like a very, very simple example. My friend Pat here, we text all the time, and sometimes he texts me stuff that he's doing, and he absolutely, I mean, Pat, you absolutely blew me away when you showed me this prompt that you wrote. So I want you to kind of go through that. It was all about curriculum mapping, which I had never even thought of doing with this, but you came through, and I'm super excited for you to explain what you did and what your prompt was.
Yeah, well, I think that just real quickly to speak to, I brought this point up last time. That all the technology that's out there, all the ChatGPT stuff and other AI infused sort of kind of things, it's just fun to experiment with, just to kind of see what its limitations are or what its capabilities are, because it's all kind of largely unknown to everybody. So we're kind of just dabbling with it. So I think everybody's in this experimental phase. And for me, I was thinking, well, gosh, I mean, I'm on a curriculum map team right now with my district, and I thought, well, how could I apply it here? It hadn't dawned on me until I was in the team, right. And we were sitting in a meeting, with teachers from our school and then from a neighboring school in our district, and I wanted to kind of cut through some of the dialogue that we were having, because I think we as a group, we were trying to figure out how to kind of negotiate each other's personalities, right, and expectations and egos and all that stuff. And I thought, gosh, I wonder what ChatGPT would say about this, and would it maybe simplify things for us in a way that maybe we struggle with because we're just trying to kind of formulate ideas on the spot. And so what I did, this is actually mid-meeting, we were discussing, what are we going to do for the junior level English class, because we're trying to kind of reframe it. And at one point, we were trying to think about, like, what's the ethos of that particular class. And we kind of realized, well, juniors are not entirely the adults, right? But they're kind of starting that ascent into adulthood. And it seems to be a cleaner, not break necessarily, but there seems to be something more mature about a junior than certainly a sophomore. I think that's probably why I call them sophomore jokes or whatever.
Sophomore humor.
Right. So
it's always about poop.
Yeah, but we also want them to explore things out and to kind of like learn, who it is that they're becoming, right? So I was thinking, okay, so there's a concept called On Becoming. I was kind of riffing off of another podcast called On Being by Krista Tippett that I love and I've always listened to for years. But I thought, well, what does that mean to be becoming or to become? And so I typed that in the ChatGPT and it gave me this wonderful sort of definition. It's like a 4-point thing.
What were some of those points?
So the points were like it includes self-discovery, identity formation, personal growth, and transformation. And it ripped out like full-on definitions for each. And I just shared that with my English, my junior level English kind of team. And they're like, well, how'd you come up with that? Because it sounded really intelligent. I'm like, look at this. And they're like, whoa. And so we're all kind of blown away by it. I said, well, let's take it a step further. If I just said, let's take those 4 different ideas. Let's say that self-discovery was unit 1. Unit 2 was on personal growth. Unit 3 was identity formation. And unit 4 was transformation. Then,
So you took the definition,
right?
The 4 different ones, and you said we can just drop it in there.
Yeah, I literally said here's the prompt. I said, be an English teacher, right? Use the following definition for self-discovery, which would be unit 1. And I said and that gives me I plopped in the definition. Here's the definition, by the way. It just says self-discovery is the process of exploring and understanding oneself. It involves gaining awareness of one's strengths, weaknesses, values, and beliefs, and recognizing how they shape one's behavior and choices. Self-discovery is a crucial step in the journey of becoming. There's the on becoming part, as it allows individuals to identify their true selves and develop a sense of purpose and direction. And I thought, wow, this is fantastic. And it seemed to fit the ethos of the junior level. And then what I said at the end of the prompt is I said, okay, great. Then generate 4 guiding or essential questions for a unit on self-discovery. Bam. And it nailed me with 4. And they're really good, right? So for example, like one is like, what are some effective ways to explore and understand oneself? How can gaining awareness of our strengths and weaknesses help us to achieve our goals and become our best selves? What role do our values and beliefs play in shaping our behavior and decision-making process? And then the last one, how can self-discovery lead to a sense of purpose and direction of our lives? And when everyone saw that, we're like, oh, well, that just saved us a bunch of time. And I think more importantly, it saved us, I think, a lot of the hassle, kind of the jockeying, if you will, of people trying to kind of come to the conversation with their own ideas that are kind of half baked anyways.
Right.
And it kind of like just gave us some footing, gave us some foundation. Now, it's not that we are necessarily going to ultimately go with that.
It's a starting point.
But it's a great starting point. Exactly. Yeah. And so that's something that really kind of, it advanced the conversation rather than us just kind of like throwing out whatever random thing that was so kind of essential to the way we've been doing things, but didn't necessarily apply to everybody else.
Right. So if I can interrupt.
Yeah, please.
So you literally wrote in the ChatGPT box, be an English teacher.
Correct.
You told it how to function, right? And then you used to drop the definition and you said, please write four questions, essential questions or guiding questions on it. And it's supposed to act, and it does do this. It'll think like an English teacher or act like it's thinking like that. And it gave you the 4 questions.
Well,
right?
And then I took it another step further because I thought, well, that's kind of at the teacher level. Mm-hmm. Now, if I'm in a classroom trying to teach this, I might throw those questions out there as kind of almost like umbrella questions. Fine. But if I'm getting into the nitty gritty, or if I want the students to get into the nitty gritty of like what we're talking about, I said, well, I prompted the ChatGPT to say, okay, give me a list of 10 questions that would help high school students with self-discovery. And then it ripped off 10. Right. I was like, whoa, shoot. So it'd be like things like, what are your top 3 values and how do they influence your decisions?
Question.
Or what motivates you and how can you maintain that motivation over time? Or what challenges have you faced and how have you overcome them? Like these kinds of things that are questions. Essential. They're great.
You could literally give that a whole list to kids and say, pick 2.
Right.
Right. And then to go back to your prompt, I mean, so you didn't say be an English teacher again because you don't have to because ChatGPT remembers that. And then you just followed up with like, give me 10 questions on whatever it was, blah, 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 right? That would help high school students. So there's the audience with self-discovery. And maybe looking back, it'd be junior level high school students, but it's kind of already in there anyway because of the curriculum map.
Right. Well, because to your point, what's happening is that like every time you start a chat, it's its own thread.
Right.
Right. So it's almost like it's its own conversation, if you will. So it tends to remember. Yeah. Now, having said that, and some of you maybe have experienced this and you or read about it where like if you kind of keep going with the threads, sometimes it starts to deteriorate in terms of quality.
Right.
So you do have to be mindful of that. However, if you're keeping it relatively short in terms of the thread relatively short and manageable, then it actually does a pretty good job.
Yeah, you can like prompt ChatGPT and say, please reread the directions. And it will apologize and say, oh, I'm sorry, I was supposed to do that.
I love how polite it can be sometimes.
Right, I know.
I'm like, whoever programmed that, they're just like, they're nice people.
Was there anything else? That one that you had? I think I had a question, but I can't remember.
Well, so the group actually ended up saying, you know what, the on becoming, it did that language didn't really speak to them.
Okay.
And so again, this is all draft stuff, so nothing's set in stone. So we came up with the idea of like embracing the journey. So I thought, okay, well, great, let's do with that. Go with that phrasing, and I put out a new prompt, and I just said, okay, we'll create a curriculum map with four theme-based units along with guiding questions per unit, all on the topic of, quote, embrace the journey, end quote. And then it just gave me 4 units. The first one is discovering your path, and it's got 3 guiding questions. Unit 2 is overcoming obstacles, 3 guiding questions. 3 is mindful living, and 4 is celebrating success. And all those have, the various guiding questions. And then it followed up with a paragraph that says, each unit could include activities such as journaling, discussion, self-reflection, exercises, goal-setting, presentations, and then speaks to the overarching goal of the curriculum and this idea of like developing growth mindset and becoming self-aware and mindful individuals. I thought, oh my God, awesome. It seemed to kind of nail exactly what we're going for.
Right.
And it was clear. And here's the thing, and is that I was doing this like a month ago.
Right.
And that was with ChatGPT 3.
Right.
ChatGPT 4 is out and it's even more precise. So I haven't run it through before, but I know
that would be interesting.
It would be, but I've tested this before with other sort of kind of prompts, and it's much more expansive, but also just more clear, and it really is an improvement. I know some people disagree with that, but I've tested it and it is clearly
in your
better.
Opinion, it's better.
Oh, absolutely.
You know what I hope, Pat? I hope that school districts will start paying for the educators in their district to have ChatGPT subscriptions. Because if I remember when you start teaching, you'd have a big fat textbook,
Right.
Like, we'd have like the American Lit book, and it was divided into units, and they had all this stuff here. But what's cool about ChatGPT is that you can actually have the idea and create the unit in seconds.
Well, and it's funny you should say that, because what I did after that was I thought, okay, let's keep pushing this further.
This is mind blowing.
And so I have seniors after spring break. They're going to go ahead and do independent book reads. And I went ahead and I said, okay, I want to see if ChatGPT can basically create tables with information on with information for a unit that is kind of self-generated. So whether I create it for the students or they do it for themselves. But to do that, I realized, okay, well, wait, hold on. There's a book. There's maybe essential questions. There's themes. Any other sort of parameters you want to put in there, and it could do that. But how I did it for this is I said, okay, go ahead, and I want ChatGPT to select 5 texts that would maybe best speak to the concept of self-discovery. And I plopped in all the novels or extended texts, as we say, into ChatGPT.
Right. And we
can narrow down the list.
We had like over 100. We had to use our approved book list.
Right.
And we have like over 100.
Right. And so for my seniors, essentially, they could basically choose anything from freshman year on up to senior year.
Oh.
Right. So I can put in all those. But for this purpose, I actually kind of just put in the junior level. And it basically told me which 5 would focus on self-discovery. For the seniors, though, what I could have them do is generate a list with a table for each individual student. So let's say, for example, I've got a classroom of 25 kids, and I want to know, well, okay, I'm gonna list out maybe like each kid has their own book. I'm going to list out every single book that those kids have. And I'm going to say, go ahead, set these up in a table and give me themes for each book, and give me guiding questions for each one. And I also included, like, give me like artworks, like paintings and sculptures that seem to kind of correlate with those themes, because the class kind of has an art component to it. And so it basically ripped out tables of all of those things for each individual book. So students basically could have their own pre-made unit, right, with guiding questions, themes, and other supplemental text in there, and then they could run with that.
Right. Let me see. I'm trying. I got a little confused. If I get a little confused, and
Sure.
I kind of know this assignment. So in the prompt box, what did you put? Like, do you remember your process?
The prompt box itself, it was something along the lines of, create a table using these texts or the following texts.
So like all the texts.
Yeah.
Right?
So the prompt was like, give me a table with all these texts, providing themes for each one, guiding questions for each one, or a guiding question for each one, and supplemental texts or artworks, right, that would correspond with those themes. And then I copied and pasted all the different novels in there, right? And then it started like creating a list. Now, what I found out was that it had, for whatever reason, and maybe ChatGPT 4 can do more, but I was using 3 at the time, and it could give me like 8 at a time. So I had to kind of like
tokens.
Right. So I had to kind of like adjust there.
Yep.
But it could do it, and it could do it, in mass, essentially, really, really quickly. And I realized, wait, I can provide this list to my students and say, hey, here's what you're going to do for the next unit. Or I can say, if you don't like that, come up with your own. You input some parameters and figure out what works for you. And I thought that was really kind of game changing, because I love the idea of giving students more autonomy and choice, especially at the junior, senior levels, and have them kind of take ownership over what they want to learn, because then they'll be much more invested in it and have some great sort of responses. Yeah,
you could, now that I'm thinking about your assignment, you could have kids do a form, a Google form, have them put their name in it, a couple books that they want to read, then take that information, do a prompt that's like, be an English teacher or be a librarian, from the list, from the table you dump in the prompt, like from this list, create essential questions for each book, right, assigned each student. Or you could say find which books have thematically related content, develop 10 questions for those books, and then it would do it, and you'd have it, and you just copy and paste it into a document and print it out and give it to the kids and say, go.
Right, essentially, yeah.
So basically what you did is you created individualized instruction or questions, content, and you could even have a follow-up like, writing questions, right?
Right.
With that, every kid's doing something slightly different, but they're all doing a similar activity. So you actually individualized their education for that
Right.
unit.
And here's the thing. If I'm hearing you correctly, what you're saying is that, like, I could set that up for them. I could set those parameters up for them. You can take it a step further, though, and say, all right, here's you can create that as like options for the kids. And then you could also say, you know what, if this doesn't work for you, like, you might want to just come up with your own thing. Like, you play with it and come up with your own sort of parameters,
sure.
and then run them by me, and I'll let you know if I think that's going to work or not. Because you may find something, or you might want to take things in a different direction, and I'm okay with that too. My big thing is I want them to kind of really be fully invested in whatever they're reading and the concepts within, concepts or themes right within that book.
Right.
And then how do you then relate it to other sort of things, specifically in this case within the art world, and to create some sort of kind of product. It could be a paper, it could be a presentation, it could be a short documentary, it could be whatever. But that it's more on their terms and less on mine, but they're still showing critical thinking. They're showing the ability to synthesize. They're showing the ability to, come up with something fresh and unique, and it requires their voice. Right. We people are so worried about creativity being lost or their voice being kind of, subsumed by ChatGPT. I'm like, no, this is an enhancer. It can amplify it if you know how to kind of, approach it.
It's new creation.
Exactly.
It's like you go back to, this is probably a topic for a different podcast, but like all of our culture and art is built on that what came before, and we just kind of accelerate a little bit, or it seems like we accelerate. Some people would say we do the opposite.
Meaning what?
That we're not accelerating, like that things are going downhill. But I mean, if you think about it, I mean, you can generate music so quickly, and before it would take you just, a week to get a song out. Now you can do it in a day. Right.
Yeah. I mean, personally, I just like the idea. And if we think about the way in which education is evolving, the idea of individualizing things when we were in high school, I don't even know if that was a thought.
I mean, you read this, you had this test, right?
And now it's, that's literally part of our school's district's mission, is they want everyone to be kind of, independent thinkers and self-driven and this sort of thing. And I think that's great. And there are programs out there that have been, pushing for that. So you think of something as big as like Khan Academy that so many people use. That's all about individualizing instruction. That's good. That's helpful. It's kind of trying to cater to the nuanced sort of understandings of any particular student. I'm just saying, great, use GPT to help you actualize that.
Right. Maybe this would be a good time to refer anyone listening that there is a linked website that has a bunch of other prompts on it. But I think that's probably enough, especially if you're listening. I will kind of say this in closing, so what is prompt engineering? Prompt engineering is how you prompt ChatGPT, but it's really how you program it to get the output that you want. And the cool thing is that you're just programming it with your words, your sentences, and the tasks that you give it. Adjectives are important. Task audience is important. And so why is it important? Well, it's how you get your output. But I think Pat may have said it there at the end, is that it's important because you can individualize a person's education. All right, we hope that this episode helps you understand prompt engineering and why it is useful. If you would like some quick but more in-depth details of what is behind the prompt, check out the bonus episode on the Bot Brothers AI for Educators called Is ChatGPT for Thinking? Also, we have resources linked in today's show notes, including our Twitter feed and a Google form. I'm Mike Pearson.
And I'm Pat Burns.
Thank you for listening to the Bot Brothers, AI for Educators. If you enjoyed our show, please share with friends, follow us, and give us a rating. Hope you tune in next time.